Well, happy Thanksgiving, Boys and Girls Club. We certainly miss being there with you and miss the opportunity to share a meal with you guys and miss the opportunity of serving you a wonderful Thanksgiving feast. But we hope you enjoy the meal that you're getting tonight. And we hope you're all doing well and staying safe, and we hope you have a great Thanksgiving. We look forward to the chance that we get to be back in to serve meals and to share meals with you all and to see how you're all doing. I wanted to share what has become the tradition for us at the club and Thanksgiving, and so I'm glad to do this. It's a little story called Little Ant, and it starts with a good friend of mine named Kurt. Kurt is a hard worker. He works at the local Boys and Girls Club, and he is always busy cleaning up after those kids so that they have a safe and sanitary place to come into. But every night, Kurt goes home and Kurt is exhausted. He is so tired from the work that he has put in and day out that when he gets home, he just is ready to go to bed. And so Kurt came home and he went back into this bedroom in his house, and he laid down in his bed, and there was something there. It hurt his back. So he sat up and he realized there was a brick sitting in his bed. And so Kurt got up and he thought, that's weird. And he went over to the window and opened the window and threw the brick out and went back in and laid down and went to sleep. The next day, Kurt got up and he went to work, and again, he cleaned all of the Boys and Girls Club, the bathrooms and the gyms and the classrooms and the toys, and he made sure that everything was sanitary to make sure that the kids were safe when they came and enjoyed the club. And when he got home, he was exhausted. And so Kurt went into his bed and he lied down, and there was something in his bed. And so he sat up and he turned and looked, and sure enough, there was a brick there. That was weird. So he picked up the brick and he walked it outside the house and walked it to the edge of his property, and he threw it down in the creek. And he thought, that'll take care of that. And he went home and he went to bed. The next day, Kurt got up and he went and he worked long, hard days again at the Boys and the Girls Club, because you all are very messy. And he had to keep it clean, and he wanted to make sure you were coming into a safe space. So he cleaned and cleaned and cleaned, and then he came home and he was exhausted. So he went into his room and he lied down to go to sleep. And as he laid down, there was something in his bed. And he sat up and he looked in his bed, and there was that brick again. How weird. So he picked up the brick and left his house and got in his car, and he drove it to the outskirts of town, and there he threw it out in the field thinking, that'll take care of that brick. I shall never see it again. And he went home and he went to bed and he got some good sleep. And the next day he got up and he went in and he cleaned at the Boys and Girls Club. Kurt is such a good worker and so faithful and so clean. And he loves biscuits and gravy, which are coming in December. And he cleaned and cleaned and cleaned, and he went home and he was exhausted. So he went to his room and laid down in his bed, and there was something in it. And he sat up and he looked, and sure enough, there was a brick. So he picked up the brick and he called a friend of his who happens to fly a plane. And he said, hey, would you take me up in your plane? And his friend said, sure, come on over. So he went over and he got up in the plane and got up high with his friend. And once he felt he was high enough, he took the brick and he threw it out the window of the plane. And he thought, that'll take care of that brick. And he went home and he was exhausted and he fell asleep in his bed and slept so great. Now there's another story, and it's a story about Little Ant. Little Ant was trying to find his way in life. He was trying different sports and different groups at school, and he thought, I'd like to run. I think I could be fast. And so Little Ant went out to join the track team. And then all the other ants were a little bit bigger than him, because he was, after all, Little Ant. And they kind of laughed because they thought, you'll never be any good at this. You're too little. But little Ant was pretty determined. And so he'd go to track practice and he'd run and run and run. And they found out that Little Ant was pretty fast. He was actually really fast. And they thought he could do really well. So he went to his first track meet. And all his friends and his family were there to cheer him on. And the runners from the other schools were there. And they all got down on the starting line to start their race. And the starter, the referee of the race, raised his his signal into the air and fired off the gun, and they began running. And they began cheering for him in the crowd, and this is where you need to help. If you know this, come on, let's cheer. They began to yell for Little Ant. They'd say, go Little Ant, go Little Ant, go. Now, that was the first time. That wasn't very good. I think we can do a lot better. I know it's been a whole year since we've told this story, but this is tradition. And if we're going to do tradition, well, we should do tradition right. So let's try that again. And let's see if we can all do it together, and let's make sure we're all doing it a little bit louder. So Little Ant began to run, and the crowd began to yell, go Little Ant, go Little Ant, go! And he sped up, and he won the race. It was amazing. And he continued through the track season, and people were pretty impressed because, well, after all, he was Little Ant. And so he showed up to the next track meet to run, and he lined up, and all the other schools were there, and they got online with him, and they kind of chuckled and snickered, and they'd say things to one another that he couldn't quite hear, but he knew they were talking about him, kind of making fun of his size. But they got on the starting line, and the referee raised his gun, and he fired the shot, and the race began, and his friends and family and school workers began to cheer for him in the crowd, yelling, go Little Ant, go Little Ant, go! And he began to speed up, and they'd yell again, go Little Ant, go Little Ant, go! And he'd speed up a little bit more to take the lead, and they'd yell, go Little Ant, go Little Ant, go! And he won the race. And it was amazing, and sure enough, the buzz about Little Ant began to spread. And people began to write newspaper articles, and they'd take pictures and share with it on Facebook, and they talk about it on Instagram, and they do TikTok videos about Little Ant. And it was pretty exciting. And so he kept going through the race, and the next race, his coach showed up, and he says, Little Ant, you've been running quite well, but I'm going to give you these shoes, and these are going to help you out to make you a little bit faster, to make you a little bit more competitive. And so he put on his shoes, and he went down to the starting line, and there again, there were new racers down there, and they kind of laughed and chuckled at him. They'd whisper at each other, and he knew again they were talking about him. But he was determined to do his best and to run his race. And so he tied on his new sneakers, and he got on the starting line, and the referee raised his gun, and he shot it off, and he took off, and the crowd began to cheer and yell, go Little Ant, go Little Ant, go! And he'd speed up, and they'd yell again, go Little Ant, go Little Ant, go! And they'd get so excited, and they'd yell more, go Little Ant, go Little Ant, go! And he'd win the race. Every time he'd win these races as the crowd would cheer him on and yell his name, and it was such an exciting moment. It was like being at some of the biggest sporting events of all time. Well, one of the big qualifying races came at the end of the season. It was regionals, and so he showed up there, and there some of the fastest runners that had ever raced were at the regionals. They were much bigger than Little Ant, and he was pretty nervous about it. But his coach encouraged him and challenged him and said, you do you, and you run your race. And then you'll go home and be proud of the fact that you did all that you can, regardless of what place you finish. And so he tied his shoes on, and he got at the starting line, and the referee raised the gun, as he had so many times in other races, and fired it off, and the race took off, and the crowd erupted, cheering for Little Ant, yelling, go Little Ant, go Little Ant, go! And he'd speed up, and they'd yell again, go Little Ant, go Little Ant, go! And he'd speed up some more, and they'd yell, go Little Ant, go Little Ant, go! And he'd win the race. And so he'd won regionals, and he was able to go on to district. And he was able to race there, and there the ants were even faster and even bigger. And some were red, and some were black, and some were fire ants, and some were just mean. And so he knew he had to run his race, and so he began to tie his shoes up. And just like every other race before, he'd go through his exercises, stretching, preparing, making sure he was ready for this. But he was nervous. He was sweating, and his heart was beating profusely. But he got on the line, and the referee raised the gun, and he shot it off, and the crowd erupted again, yelling, go Little Ant, go Little Ant, go! And he sped up, and go Little Ant, go Little Ant, go! And he sped up and won the race. So he won districts. And now he had a chance to go to state, to race the best in the entire state of Indiana. And these ants were 3-4 times bigger than Little Ant was. And they had fancy shoes. And he just had the same shoes that he'd been wearing all season. But he was determined to do his best. And so his coach offered him some encouraging words. And by then, when he met at the race, the other ants didn't really talk about him. They'd pat him on the back, and they'd say, oh, I'd heard so much about you, and we've been following about you, and you're kind of a big deal, Little Ant. We look forward to seeing how this race goes and to racing against you. Good luck. And so he felt finally like he belonged. and he was ready to run this race. And the crowd had gathered, and many of them had come just to see Little Ant race. And so they all got down on the line, and he tightened his shoes up to make sure everything was ready to go. And he placed all 6 hands on the ground for it to start. And in slow motion, it felt like the referee raised his gun and fired it off. And as the smoke cleared, all the ants took off from the space, and Little Ant was far behind them, just because he was so little and so slow. But they began to cheer, "Go, Little Ant, go, Little Ant, go!" And he'd sped up. And they'd yell again, "Go, Little Ant, go, Little Ant, go!" And he'd speed up some more, by now catching the rest of the ants running in line with him, neck and neck, and torso to torso, and butt to butt, and they were running, "Go, Little Ant, go, Little Ant, go!" And they were nearing the finish line, and he was beginning to creep forward in the lead, and the crowd yelled again, "Go, Little Ant, go, Little Ant, go!" And just as he crossed the finish line, bam! The brick hit him and smashed him. Have a happy Thanksgiving. We hope you guys have a great meal. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.